Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Rob Simonds, and I am the board president of the Downtown Chamber Series. And I am joined by pianist, educator, academic leader, and all-around big thinker, John Milbauer, who is making his DCS debut November 20th and 21st at Legend City Studios. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Rob. Happy to be here. Looking forward to playing with Ian Jones.
Right. So, John, you and your recital partner, Ian Jones, cellist Ian Jones, are coming up from Tucson with a wildly eclectic program. American music, European music from the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century. So talk to us about how you compose and create a program like that. And what are the things that hold something like that all together?
Well, great questions. I'll say that what drew me to the piano a long, long time ago was the sound of the instrument itself. As a result, music that explores timbre has always been a huge draw for me. And that includes, extended techniques like Crumb or Cage, or even composers like Chopin, who just write so beautifully for the instrument that they are maximizing the timbral possibilities for it. And that links very well with the training I had in piano, where controlling the keys, of getting to nitty-gritty of piano technique. It's not 88 on and off switches. It's 88 possibilities for color. And if you control not just the depression of the key, but the rise of the key, you really control timbre. And I had the great fortune of studying with someone who really understood that and understood how to teach that. So while the repertoire that I play is often off the beaten track and unusual, it is approached with a real understanding of an appreciation for his golden age of piano sound, where people really controlled the key in both directions and controlled the pedal in both directions. And so that explains my general interest in music that explores timbral possibilities. Mm-hmm. And then with this program in particular, it's nice, especially first time playing in the series, it's nice to start with something that people will be familiar with. So having Ian open with a Bach prelude, for example, and one of the most well-known Bach preludes is a statement of welcome and an openness and reciprocity, let's say. And it's a great way to open a program. Mm-hmm. And then going from that into a solo piece by John Cage from 1946, from two pieces for piano. And so the title of this is 3-5-2. And that has to do with the meter and how these snippets of sound are put together. And what I love about that is that he's having fun with the sound of the piano and sound in time. Sort of music at its most basic is sound in time, perhaps with some kind of significant form. And the significant form in this case is the arrangement of 3, 5, and 2 bar snippets. And so if people are familiar with the visual arts, you might think of this idea of shapes floating through air is what draws me to Cage. And something else that I love about Cage, there's so much silence in this music. So this piece, the 3-5-2, it's only about 5 minutes. But of those 5 minutes, maybe half is silence. And what I find after playing this Cage piece in particular is that whatever you put after it benefits, because people's ears have opened during the 5 minutes of the Cage work. It really recalibrates audiences' hearing and mine, and the performers as well. So whatever you put after it is going to sound fresh and delightful. And so I put after that John Adams, China Gates. John Adams is a minimalist composer. His main piano pieces from the 1970s, as this one is 1977. And, minimalism is this undulating surface of fast moving notes, but actually the processes behind the music are moving very slowly. So you have this impression of movement, but the harmonies in particular are shifting irregularly and slowly. And so there's this wash of sound, and it's another way to play with timbre on the instrument. So the quality of sound itself is really engaging. And I've not played that after Cage, so this will be an adventure for me. I've played the Adams a lot, I've played the Cage a lot, but this combination I haven't done yet. So I'm curious to see how the atoms feels to me after the cage. And then we bring Ian back on stage for our first piece together, which is a Lili Boulanger work. And you know, for in 20th century music, the case of Lili Boulanger is fascinating. She wrote such extraordinary music in such a tragically short life. I think 24 she died, I believe. And it was her sister who became famous. Lili Boulanger is the teacher of Bernstein and Copland. But everything that Lili Boulanger wrote that I've come across is just astonishing in its evocation of sound images, whether it's for violin and piano or cello and piano, voice and piano. I love her music. And so it's another extension of what does music sound like in a space? What is music, say, in addition to sonata form or a fugue process, but just sound in time resonating in a space. So, and here you're getting a sense of what is pulling this program together. It's not thematically related. It's not a country. It's not a period. It's a lot of music that is really stimulating to the ears. And then we finished the first half with Janáček, Pohadka Fairy Tale, which is a gorgeous piece. It's very atmospheric and aphoristic and can be hard to latch onto, as with all of Janáček, I think. I'll be surprised if the majority of the audience has heard it before, so it'll be a real treat for people to hear probably for the first time. It's enchanting and captivating and fits well with the rest of this first half in, let's say, if you remove the tyranny of meter from music and you're left with gestures and sound and time and gestures. What does that mean as a possibility for a piano and cello piece written in the middle of the 20th century? So that's our first half. And then the Dutilleux that Ian will play, Dutilleux is a fascinating composer for the mid-20th century. And although this piece is rather late for him. And again, will be new to most audience members. And then the Crumb after that is a lot of extended techniques within the piano. And I've checked with Mark that what I'm doing is okay. And I work with technicians to make sure that no damage will be done to the instrument. But Crumb, more than any of these composers, is exploring timbre. And if I can say a bit more about why timbre, as you know, Rob, by the time we get to 1900, chromaticism is saturated in music. And Brahms wrote the last really gorgeous tonal music, as chromatic as possible. And then Reger didn't quite get the message that language was done and he should have gone in a different direction. And I think I'm not a Reger fan. It sounds like, did Brahms not happen for you? And so composers go in different directions, Stravinsky and Schoenberg and Bartók and Debussy. So in terms of chromaticism or diatonicism and the saturation of harmony, you really can't get more advanced than Brahms and Wagner and Mahler. So they have to go in a different direction. And with rhythm, you can't get more complicated than Stravinsky and Bartók and eventually with other mid-20th century composers. And so in many ways, what's left is timbre. And so I'm really interested in what composers have done with sound itself, sound quality itself. And so Crumb, I think inspired by Bartók, inspired by Debussy and their explorations of timbre, he starts having the pianist reach inside the piano and play harmonics and pluck strings with a fingernail or a fingertip. And the sounds are enchanting. I think the first time I heard this Suite for Christmas, I was absolutely captivated. And it was the middle of the summer in New York. And one thing that I'm looking forward to is playing this Suite for Christmas, inspired by Giotto's frescoes in Padova, nativity frescoes. Playing it around the holiday season is a special treat. And I guarantee that people will enjoy that work. And then finishing with this Haydn Piatigorsky arrangement of a divertimento, sort of gets the plane back on the ground safely. So the Bach is the entryway into a peculiar world, probably for most listeners, and going through Lili Boulanger and Cage and Adams and Dutilleux and Janáček. It's quite a journey. And how do you land that ship safely? Is Haydn will remind people you're back on the ground. There's some charming music to send you home, and it's a lovely piece that I haven't played before, and I'm glad Ian brought it to my attention. So at this point, I've forgotten the question, Rob, and it's a very long answer.
I appreciate this wonderful overview of the whole performance and everything we're going to hear this weekend or that weekend. I'd love to come back to the Crumb a little bit more and ask for some more specifics. So I think one of the things that is constraining as a classical performer and as a consumer of classical music is that a lot of what we think of as classical music actually sounds very similar. Like the difference between Mozart and Beethoven doesn't actually sound that much different than early Brahms or other major composers we think of. And expanding that palette, especially with shorter pieces across an evening's worth of music, I think is a really wonderful way to explore sound and timbre, like you said, in ways that to any normal person would sound different. And as we explore those sounds, so the last DCS concert, our audience has heard George Crumb's String Quartet Black Angels, which explored a whole world of extended techniques in string playing. Could you tell us with a little bit more specificity how you create these strange sounds for the Crumb on the solo piano?
So every Crumb work will have instructions on the first pages for the extended techniques. And so you actually don't need someone to teach them to you. It does save some time. You just follow the instructions. And so there are indications to pluck the strings inside, and will be indicated FT fingertip or FN fingernail. They have distinct sounds. There are many harmonics played, and the harmonics are where things get tricky, because if you're looking for, say, a fifth partial, which is 2 octaves and a third above a fundamental of the key that you're playing. So if it's indicated fifth partial or fourth overtone, and then you have to find that node along the string, find it easily in time so that you can play a harmonic, as strings play harmonics all the time, as you know. It's just unusual to hear them on piano, and it's a haunting sound. It's like a bell. And so the Crumb has harmonics all over the place, both on the very deep wound copper bass strings and on the upper strings as well. You can't tell on Zoom I'm 6'3", and I can barely reach some of these on a long piano. So the choreography of Crumb is significant. You're reaching inside a lot. I can't wear a jacket when I do this. The first time I played it was in school in New York, and a friend came and he said, it looked like you were working on your car for 15 minutes, because I hadn't really figured out the choreography, and it probably looked very, very awkward. But now reaching and finding harmonics is easy and fluent. So a lot of harmonics, a lot of pizzicato, also the depression of the use of the sostenuto pedal, the middle pedal if you have 3 pedals on a piano. And so you press keys silently, you then depress the sostenuto pedal, which keeps those specific dampers raised. And then those strings with the dampers off them are able to have sympathetic resonance with other notes that you play. And so there's a very eerie effect of having undampened strings adding to the resonance of what's being played. So those are 3 primary ones.
Yeah, I think audiences will really enjoy seeing and hearing you play this music. I'd love to talk a little bit about the John Cage. And I was remembering something from many, many years ago when I was an undergraduate at the University of Cincinnati in the music school. And one of the professors said with great pride that John Cage had come to teach at the conservatory. And one of the composition professors stood up and said, actually, that's not true. Cage came to the university to teach philosophy, not to teach music at the conservatory. And so all that to say that John Cage's music is quite idiosyncratic. It's not beholden to maybe some of the same characteristics and the same traditions as what we think of a traditional composer. And you've earned a great reputation for being someone who can bring this kind of idiosyncratic music with a great deal of accessibility. Can you talk a little bit more about what we might hear in this performance, and what are the challenges so how do you unbox the composer's the strange composer's indications? And what are the challenges for you as a performer of this music?
Great questions. I love everything about Cage, especially from this period. So early Cage, I think is I mean, he would bristle at this. He would think it's a silly comment. It's my favorite Cage. We shouldn't have favorites. The sound should all be equal, et cetera, et cetera. It's very counter to his philosophy to say that early Cage is my favorite, but it's my favorite. And that's say from the mid 40s until 1952. So a week after my DCS concert with Ian, I'm doing the sonatas and interludes for prepared piano here at the University of Arizona, and which is an hour on a single prepared piano without a break.
John, can you just say a little bit more about what a prepared piano is and maybe what the genesis of it is?
Sure. So it's something I wouldn't do on this piano here in my house. So that the genesis, it's a nice story. Cage was working at a school for dance, and one year they had a budget for a percussion ensemble, and the next year they didn't have that budget for the percussion ensemble, and he thought, well, I'll make my own percussion ensemble by sticking hardware into an old piano and getting the sound of a percussion ensemble. And so it mixes many things, his interest in Hindu mysticism and sounds of the East. It's really more gong-like sounds. So a prepared piano can often sound like an Indonesian gamelan, depending on how it's prepared. And I think that's some of the inspiration. So there are very strict instructions it takes in the case of the piece I'm playing here in Tucson. It takes maybe 4 hours to set up the piano properly. And that's after having done it many times before. Dozens of pieces of hardware, nuts, bolts of very specific sizes placed at exact places along a string. And then you have to accommodate for different string lengths on different piano lengths, because if you're looking for a certain harmonic and Cage indicates it should be 3 1/4 inches from the end pins, well, that's on the piano he wrote for. And so that's a lot of fun. So I don't know if that's one of the challenges. And I'm not preparing the piano for the piece I'm playing in Phoenix. This is around the same time, but this is an unprepared piece. So in the 40s and early 50s, Cage has wonderful pieces for prepared piano and wonderful pieces for unprepared piano. And so this is one of the unprepared pieces that I'm going to do for DCS. I'll back up and say I have concerns that the arts are not always the domain of imagination, creativity, and innovation as they were. And I had difficulty, you probably did too, Rob, in school. If I wanted to program something in the 1990s, I wanted to play the Crumb suite for my jury at Juilliard, and it got initial approval. And then the day of my jury, I walk in and the chair says, "We don't want to hear the Crumb. It won't tell us anything about your playing." And I understand now that perspective. I know what he was trying to say. In the end, he might be chagrined to know that of my class at Juilliard, the only ones who get any attention or press are the ones who play only music of the last 50, 60 years. But that was not the case in 1995, 1994. And what I see now is that, well, I say for our generation, we were always fighting, really, advocating for the inclusion of newer music and older music, say before Bach, in our repertoire. And I think our faculty were more conservative at the time. And now we see that has changed. And the faculty are generally much more adventurous in repertoire. And we have students who play extraordinarily well, but nothing before late Beethoven and nothing after early Debussy. And that's a big generalization, but it's largely true, I would say, unless you have your specialists who play only music that's where the ink is still drying.
So John,
go ahead.
If I could interrupt you. So you're saying as a professional, as a performer who plays all around the world, there's absolutely a market and an appetite for contemporary art to speak to contemporary issues. And as a performer, you are in demand to do that. Have you found as an educator to be more liberated in terms of getting your students to get excited about pursuing the things that they wanted to pursue? Or do you still feel like there's a burden as an educator to make sure your students are well grounded in the fundamentals of the instrument?
The burden is to make sure that they are curious about repertoire. And it's the lack of curiosity about repertoire. I'm not talking about Arizona or Chautauqua where I work in the summers. I'm just speaking in general. You can go just about anywhere in the world, and the attitudes toward repertoire are not expansive. The attitudes are quite, they're beyond conservative, and they're very short-sighted. So that's really the heavy lift. I find audiences are quite open to this music. This music being things that they haven't heard before. I always keep in mind my reaction to hearing the Chopin G minor ballade the first time. I thought and still think it's the greatest piece of piano music ever written, probably. You know, it's top 5 for sure. And so I keep that in mind, that there are people who've not heard the G minor ballade. There are people who've not heard Schumann Fantasy. But when you encounter it over and over and over and over and over and over in lessons, and you see the trends in repertoire among young pianists, very highly trained from all over the world, you see, you know, one person plays the Guido Augusti arrangement of Firebird, Stravinsky's Firebird, and then all of a sudden everyone's playing Firebird for about 18 months, and then you'll never hear it again for 30 years. And it's because people, they hear what's around them, and there's not a hunger for the repertoire as there was when we were kids, Rob. I just remember the hunger for repertoire was fascinating. And it's like Little House on the Prairie. I'm from northern Wisconsin, and you know, there were no online PDFs where I could get all the Brahms intermezzi. I had to call Minneapolis and talk to someone in real time over the phone, you know, a long distance call. It wasn't cheap in 1978. And then they would come back after 5 minutes of going through their stacks, and they say, well, we've got this version of Opus 117, and then, you know, you have to decide which one you want. And then it would take them 3 weeks to send it, and I'd be running home from school, you know, in the snow, uphill both ways against the wind. And in the day when I would get home and the manila envelope with the Brahms intermezzi would be there, was like Christmas. I think that joy of finding music is not, it's not something I see enough among young musicians. I might have a mission to expand repertoire, and I do, and it's because I love it, and it's edifying in so many ways.
I agree with you 100% that oftentimes the most open-minded stakeholder in classical music is the audience, and I think you'll find that to be especially true when you come up to Phoenix, and a joy of music making and a joy of discovery. So we look forward to your concerts on November 20th and 21st at Legend City, and we will see you there.